Phew. Hi everybody. I had a bit of a disaster for the past 4 minutes. Then I've realised that I'm not meant to be starting until 1:05. So that's really, really good. So I've got 1 minute to slurp my water. So for those that are at the beginning of this, hi everybody. This is, then I've realised that I'm not meant to start 1:05. So that's really good. So we've got a lead already. So I've got 1 minute to water. For those that are so hopefully that's okay, everybody. See what the problem is in a minute. Hang on a minute. I mess around with my computer. So the first time I've actually done this. So I'm just going to close everything down. So hopefully that's okay, everybody. I do believe I worked out the fault, folks. So I'm going to formally start this recording. And I'm just going to try and get that on. So who have we got with us today? It would help if I had somebody say something so I know that the technology is working okay. So if you would like to type something in the box on the right hand side, I would be very, very grateful. So I'm going to type something. I'm going to say, hiya, everyone. I'm hoping that we're going to have a few people join us today. So I'm just going to wait to see if there's any replies. So we have started. I'm just hoping that, oh, there we go. Someone random has joined us. Oh, phew. Do you know what? This is not an easy thing to do, to live stream on YouTube. In fact, it's quite difficult. You've got to have the technology via Zoom. Last week I didn't use Zoom technology, so this week we've got some images, so that's absolutely great. So I'm pleased that we've got a nice little group watching me at this minute, so I'm very happy with that. So I think the way I need to start is by saying hello to everybody, which I'm going to do now. Okay. Hi, hello, someone random. Hello, Alice. Hello, Anne, as well. And this is, fairly new technology to me. I've been used to teaching via the Zoom for a whole month. And the one wonderful topic that we've been doing this week is looking at the Incan civilization. And I think the best thing I can do is to start off with some images behind me. But so if we can give a go with the old screen sharing. So share my screen, and I'm hoping that I can get the technology right here today. So I'm still trying to work out the technology. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up an extra screen, and I'm hopefully going to be able to read the comments on the screen whilst I'm talking to you guys. So when I look up, I'm reading the screen, and while I'm looking at you. So enough bantering. And I'm just trying to get everything up here a minute. So if we get my images up there on the right, makes it quite easy. Can I ask everybody, are there any questions that anyone has about the Incan world? Has anyone got anything that they would like to say about the Incan world? And I'm just going to get this, get my screen sharing up. Hopefully we'll be looking at some images now. So just let that get on a minute. And okay, hopefully we'll have an image up in a minute. Hopefully we'll be looking at some images now. So just let that get on a minute. Bingo, we got an image. So technology is working right. So has anyone got anything they'd like to say? Are you all hearing me loud and clearly, please? Can you just please let me know? Write something in the box and we will get started. Right, waiting for somebody to say something. Come on, somebody write something in the box, please. And we'll get started, please. Somebody can. Right, waiting for somebody to say something. Is somebody write something in the box, please? And we'll get started, please. Somebody can. There we go. Is somebody write something in the box, please? And we'll get started, please. Somebody can. Can you all hear me? Oh, that's good. That's much better. Excellent. There we go. Can you hear me, Alice? Okay. Can you all hear me? Oh, that's good. That's much better. Excellent. So hopefully I can get this working well. And someone random a bit. You can hear me a bit. Right, okay. Right, so I've got to try and... You can hear me, Alice? So hopefully I can get this working well. Am I sounding loud and clear with you, Anne? Yeah? Okay. Anyway, this week we have been looking at the Incan world, and the Incan civilization is an intriguing civilization. And opening up with this image behind, you can see the wonderful ashlar blocks of an Incan temple. The Incan civilization, to me, conjures up a world that was conquered by the conquistadors, a world that was lost in history, and a civilization that was completely abandoned. You know, those sort of things at the top. But when I started researching the Incan civilization, I slowly realized that the Incan civilization took a lot longer to disappear than, you know, the historians give us credit for. And what it can be said that the main cause of the collapse of the Incan civilization was not directly at the hands of the Spanish conquistadors. Now, this is something that we looked at throughout this week,
I gave 5 lectures this week on the Incan civilization, and it started coming up loud and clear that there were many factors that led to the collapse of the Incan world. And one of the things that I was quite clear in studying was in regards to the background that led to the calamity of the Spanish turning up in 1532. And the background in many ways could be articulated in that before 1532, for 4, maybe 5 long years, the Incan world had been in a perpetual state of civil war. Atahualpa, that became the supreme leader, the supreme emperor of the Incan world, came to an empire that was very divided, an empire that was suffering famine, an empire that was suffering from cities and towns and villages that were on the edge of collapse, an empire that was suffering great problems due to its water systems being damaged. And with all those things mentioned, only a few, we then bring in the conquistadors in 1532. Now, a couple of people have already commented that they are interested in pre-Incan culture. Now, that's rather interesting. That's an important launching pad for this overview of the week's lectures. And those early civilizations that led to the Incan civilization exploding as an empire after 1230 are clues to why the Incan civilization eventually faltered and then failed. Lots of these smaller worlds that existed that the Incans absorbed were worlds that were fairly self-sufficient. They needed very little support from the outside. Many people, when they look at Incan civilization, should be reminded of the Nazca, for example. And the Nazca civilization was a civilization that had wonderful water systems. They had agriculture. They had towns, cities, temples, and all these different things, and quite a sizable population. But the Nazca, a few hundred years before the Incan civilization started to build, completely disappeared. And it was probably due to the fact that they got a bit big for their boots. Let's sort of change these images behind me. Hopefully it will now change. If not, we're going to be stuck with this image. So you've got to remark that Incan religion was very important to the Incan state. But in my lecture, we only touched upon it because looking at how did the Incan Empire come to an end, or the collapse of the Incan world, was a subject that involved so many different areas. The Incan Empire, before the conquistadors got there, under the leadership of Francisco Pizarro, was an empire that was very weakened. And like many civil wars in history, countries take a very long time to recover. But with the Spanish turning up towards the end of the Civil War, the recovery was never ever to take place. Much of what we do see and feel in regards to the Incan civilization has been written down by the conquerors, the Spanish. And in lots of respects, they over exaggerated their achievements. Obviously, the illustration that you see in front of you is one of those many woodcut illustrations regarding this, in brackets, conquest. On the backdrop of this conquest, it had always been wondered about the likes of Machu Picchu, of Vilcabamba. And Machu Picchu and Vilcabamba, towards the middle of the Incan world, when we look at Cusco, are localities that the Incan civilization continued for a number of decades after the invasion of Pizarro and his Spaniards. I would like to mention that anyone that's using this stream today and watching me, can you please subscribe to my channel and also like this as well. And so we've got 10 viewers at this minute, which is about 3 or 4 more concurrent viewers than last week. Machu Picchu was a site that was discovered by Hiram Bingham in 1911. And this rather interesting map shows you the extent of the Incan world. From top to bottom, if you follow the green line, the green border there, from top to bottom, this was 2,000 miles from north to south. So it was a vast empire. It was quite big. And when you actually look at that map, you get an idea to the size of the Incan world and the size of the Incan problem. The heart of the Incan world is within the heart of that green mass. And as we start to move on to these images, we're coming to this map. Do you know what? I love maps. And by the way, if anyone's got any questions, please put your questions in there. It's working quite well now. Sorry about the beginning, but we've all got to learn. So if you follow the cursor, what you can see is one of the answers to the collapse of the Incan civilization. And one of the answers is growth. And when we talk about growth, when an empire grows over a long period of time, it means that it's going to probably survive for a long period of time. Let me say this. The British Empire, whatever historian you talk to, started to really become the functioning empire that we see on maps as they're colored in. The British Empire. But by the way, is anyone else finding that my voice has gone? Anyone else? Can you all still hear me? Can we have a bit of a response there? Somebody's writing down that my voice has gone. Can you all still hear me? Just press yes or no. I'll just go quiet a minute for a response. Can you all hear me? Oh, have we lost my voice? Okay, I'm gonna type in here. Can you all hear me? Oh, yes, you can. Okay, people who can't hear my voice, it's your end, not my end. So now that's a bit of a disruption that I didn't need. But the point I was trying to make before got interrupted then This is like doing a live lecture with an audience. You know, you're trying to talk, and somebody interrupts. So when we look at the British Empire as a metaphor, many people would argue that the British Empire came to it into its own in about 1880, and when it comes into its own in the 1880s, the maps of the world are colored red. And then when you take that apart, you see that within 60, 70 years, the British Empire is more or less no more. You know, we've already lost Canada, Australia, you know, we've lost India, and then we start to lose bits of Africa. So this empire that was created in a very short period of time ended in a very short period of time. It's not a Seneca collapse. A Seneca collapse is when something takes 700-800 years to build, and then suddenly it collapses quite rapidly, like the Roman Empire. Yeah, but this is like a pyramid. The British Empire was built over a short period of time and collapsed over a short period of time. Now, when we look at this map, what we can see is that we can see in the heart of the Incan territory a great dark red blob. Now, for 170 years, the so proclaimed Incan Empire was quite stable because it kept quite small, you know, over from north to south, only a few hundred miles, not the 2,000 miles. And then when you start to think about the period from about 1400 to about 1450, again, the conquests are quite mediocre compared to the rest of it. So, you know, what we do see in the masonry and the building is that, you know, they've got manpower to build the wonderful structures that we can see dotted across much of the Incan world that you can see colored red on the map there. But then by about the 1463, the precise dates associated with the monarchy, associated with the emperors and the leaders of the Incan world, we see a massive explosion. And what you do see is within the space of 30 years, the country has expanded so much that it's unwieldy. And by 1493, and when you look at 40 years later, the collapse of the Incan world has not only already begun, by about 80 years, the Incan world has more or less ceased to exist. Now, this is an important point to the collapse of the Incan world. It became unbearably large. And when you think about the scale of the Incan problem, it was that sense of administration. The Incans were fairly good at administering their world, but you know, they needed the manpower to build those roads. And what we do see after about 1500 is that the way they're building and the glorious nature and the romantic way they're building has almost disappeared. So we'll look at some of those images, and hopefully we'll be able to look at that. And Anne mentions Lake Titicaca, as I refer to it, which is probably completely the wrong pronunciation, Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca and the people on that lake, the lake people would have been absorbed by the Incan kingdom. And people still live on that lake today, probably because they kept some of their non-Incan ways. And this is what's going on. And again, reminders, folks, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. So here we go. A little bit more of a sound check, if people can let me know how the sound is going. And have we got April with us today? Hopefully we do. And again, Machu Picchu. So going on to another point, when we were looking at the Spanish conquistadors, the very question is, did the Spanish conquistadors conquer the Incan world in a bloody conquest? And I do believe that the answer is not in the way that we read about through the history. And when you've got technology still on around you, it goes off. When we think about the conquest, was it a bloody conquest? I believe that no. I do believe it wasn't a bloody conquest. I do believe that it's quite inconceivable that the Spanish army led by Pizarro of 168 men and 62 would have been able to defeat armies of 6, 7, 8,000 men. It's inconceivable. But the historians do tell us that that's what happened. But this week we've examined the fact that it would be quite impossible to field armies of more than 1,000 with the terrain that we're talking about in regards to the Incan world. Because, you have a coastal strip, you have an upper strip, and you have like the Andes. And you're thinking, well, if you're going to have soldiers in big clumps attacking the Spanish, it's not really going to be possible, because most of it is a mountainous land. Most of these are in most of the towns and cities are several thousand feet above sea level. We're talking about Cusco being in excess of 10,000 feet above sea level, 11,000 feet above sea level. So, and this is all mountainous, and you think, well, if there were these great battles, then they must have occurred between much smaller numbers. When we look at these weapons, for example, the arquebuses of the time invented in Germany, they actually needed stands like this. So if we look at the faults of the history and how the historians are writing this down, if we go to Cajamarca, it's believed that at Cajamarca, 6,000 Incan warriors were massacred by 168 soldiers of Francisco Pizarro and 62 horses. And when we look at the terrain of Cajamarca, that's impossible. So I think what's happening is that Atahualpa went to Cajamarca with probably an army of something like 200 men, because that's all he could probably muster together. After the bloody civil war, after the facts that crops were failing, not enough food, after the fact that his men had already gone through 4 or 5 years of conflict, the armies of the Inca would have been quite small indeed. And it's quite understandable then that a Spanish army would be able to defeat quite a small army of Inca. But when the historians and the priests are writing this down, they wanted to make the reader think that the Spaniards were actually defeating an army which was absolutely huge. The usual lies of history. Atahualpa, it said, trusted Pizarro, and he was quite hospitable to Pizarro in November 1532. And if you want to know Kayamaka is. There it is on the map as I'm pointing to it north in the country. When you're looking at Kayamaka again, and Pizarro and his army, you can think that why did Atahualpa meet him? Because he wasn't afraid of him. He didn't think, as the Aztecs had done, that the Spaniards were gods. You know, he didn't think that at all. So, you know, he met with them, he trusted them, and he was captured by Pizarro. Now, I'm thinking that if there was this small battle between small numbers, one or two Spaniards would have got injured. They would have lost one or two horses. A number of them would be dead. So that then reduces Francisco Pizarro's army to a much smaller band. So then what we do see in the history, as we examined with the classes that we did this week, was that Atahualpa was kept by Pizarro as an emperor. He was kept in good fettle. He wasn't ill-treated. He was treated well. And Pizarro sent a message to Cusco, the capital city. There you can. It's capital city of Peru today. It was capital city back then as well. They sent a message to those in Cusco, and they basically said, you know, pay a ransom. So along these roadways, they sent alpacas and llamas in their panniers laden with gold. And the amount of gold is in the hundreds and hundreds of pounds of gold and silver. And actually, when we said that each man who was with Pizarro received about 48 to 50 pounds of gold each from this immense amount of gold that was coming from Cusco. This is thousands and thousands of pounds of gold, not hundreds of pounds. And when this arrived at the hands of Pizarro to release Atahualpa, Atahualpa was executed, because Pizarro believed that if there's this amount of gold, there must be more. Now, in the lectures I did this week, I covered all of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go away from my text for those that want to know more about the lectures in the week and more about the facts and the fiction and the bias side of things. Just watch my videos that I've put out there on my channel this week. And by the way, if anyone's got any questions about the collapse of the Incan civilization, please put it up there. So we got Pizarro. And what I'd like to do is move to this site. Now, this is a wonderful, wonderful site. This site is known as Coricancha. Now, for those that don't know where Coricancha is, go to Cusco, and Coricancha is now part of Cusco. It's the religious heart of the Incan world. And Coricancha, being the beaten heart of the Incan world, is said to be a location that its very streets have golden slabs on the floor as you walk through them. Coricancha, the religious heart of the Incan world, it's said that you could pick up nuggets off the streets. Coricancha, it's said that the temples themselves had golden walls internally and externally. So you think about, why do I believe that the Spanish were not responsible for the collapse of the Incan Empire? In the conclusion that I make this week, I believe that the Incan Empire had already collapsed. So how can you claim that the Spanish conquered the Incan Empire? Like most empires that this planet has seen, empires collapse from within. The Roman Empire collapsed from within, infighting amongst the generals and the emperors vying for power. The British Empire collapsed from within. You know, you can't argue that one. And other examples of empires that collapsed from within. Let's look at the empire of Napoleon. If Napoleon hadn't overextended himself in the winter of the year 1812, he could have kept control of Europe. It wouldn't have collapsed. When we think about the Viking world, there was always infighting, and that again collapsed from within. So that's why I claim that the Spanish never conquered the Incan world. They conquered fragments of what the Incan world had once been like. It's said that by the time the Spanish entered Cusco and Cajamarca, not Cajamarca, Coricancha, sorry for that mistake. When they entered Cusco and Coricancha, they were invited in as friends. And you're thinking this is quite odd, because hadn't their emperor been killed by the Spanish? Surely the beating, religious, pulsing heart of the Incan world would have seen Pizarro as an enemy, would have seen the Spaniards as enemies. And from the descriptions of the priests from the day, what we do find is that the priests, the Catholic priest that is, wrote that they welcomed us. Why did they welcome us? And the Catholic priest wrote that the pagan priests showed Pizarro and his Spaniards into the great golden temples at Coricancha. The Temple of the Sun, that is. This is one of the buildings associated with the Temple of the Sun. And these are the walls that were constructed by the Inca about 60 odd years earlier. At that period before the 1500s, when I said that before the 1500s, they were building like this with smaller blocks. And before about 1450, they'd been building with mega blocks. But about 1500, they still had the manpower to build like this. And it's very likely, as I take a moment, that I'm really starting to think that the reason why the priests of the Temple of the Sun were welcoming Pizarro is because their world had already collapsed. They were confused. They didn't make any effort to hide their gold. After all, there was thousands of pounds of it lying around. Not thousands of pounds in money, but thousands of pounds in weight. The Temple of Karl-james alone, 700 sheets. Each of those sheets of gold weighing 2 kilograms each. It's a lot of gold. And that doesn't include the gold that's lying in nuggets or plating on the floor. That doesn't include the gold that's in the form of the statues within the courtyard of these little temples at karl-james. It was said that the main statue referred to of the statue of Inti, the sun god, is said to have been flitted away by an Incan priest. Others would argue that that very statue of Inti was melted down to make the very cross that's now in dominance at the head altar at the cathedral monastery at Santo Domingo. And the cathedral and monastery at Santo Domingo is the building on the right. It actually occupies this religious site, the Temple of the Sun, that was so precious to the Incan world. Interestingly enough, 50 years ago, the temple that you can see on your left was hidden behind a wall. Another image coming up. And as they removed this wall, they found this. It was perfectly preserved. It's quite ironic, really, that you've got this very important Christian site, Santo Domingo, built directly into the heart, the pulsating heart of the religious Incan world and the heart of the Incan Empire. Now, if anyone's got anything to say it now. So we've got a question from Anne. Having said that there's no getting away from the illnesses which the Spanish brought. Yes. Other reasons for the collapse and cause of the end of the Incan world. Diseases. I remember saying 4 times this week. Sneezes cause diseases. A map of the Incan world from the 1600s, or now the Spanish world. Soon people forget, with a mountain range on the south there. Now, I explored something that was quite upsetting this week. I really didn't expand on it much. And it was that I can't help thinking that the Spanish knew that they could cause the deaths of millions of people within the Incan world by just being there. And why do I think that? 11 years earlier, when the conquistadors, Cortes and his band, with their few horses and a couple of cannon, launched an attack at the heart of the Aztec world, capturing Montezuma, as they later on did with Atahualpa. And within 5 years, out of a population of up to 20 million. Or if you want to lessen that to 10, however way you want to go. Most of the population was dead. And within 5 years, the Spanish weren't stupid. Obviously they weren't. They conquered a big chunk of the world. And you start to wonder, when they started to know about the Inca, how about sending a few traders south? I don't know. 1528, at the start of the Civil War, send a few traders south, trade with the Inca, find out what they're about. And all you would need is one ship with a couple of rats, with a few fleas, and you know the end result. All you need is to have accidentally put somebody on board with influenza. Just one of those people coughing into the face of an Inca may have led to the deaths of millions of people. And I'm thinking that it's a real possibility that diseases may have been spread deliberately. We've all seen this pandemic, haven't we? The one that we've been around, the coronavirus. And there were early cases, I think it was in March. Actually, before that, I think February, that there were reports of people deliberately spreading coronavirus. And 1 or 2 people were in prison for doing so because they admitted spreading coronavirus. Now that's in the modern day and age. I'm suggesting this with no evidence. I'm an archaeologist. But I'm suggesting that the Spaniards deliberately spread typhus, influenza, smallpox, diphtheria, measles, and all these terrible things into the Incan civilization at their heart of their civil war. So when they arrived 4 years later, they would see an economy, a religion, a people completely destroyed. They destroyed themselves because of the civil war. But so did the terrible diseases that were caused by sneezes into the Incan civilization. Somebody mentions here, when was the European plague? Always. The Antonine plague was the first plague to be reported in Europe in 161. 161. The Antonine plague, the Gallons plague, named by some after the physician that identified the plague for the first time. And then from then onwards, plagues are always being identified. The Justinian plague, for example, of 541 was a terrible plague. Within a space of 8 years, wiping out, some say, 2/3 of the population of the world. Even a third would have seen off 100 million dead over a period of 20 years. Very, very interesting thing, this about plagues. I would like a little bit of a vote that you can add on the side. How many of you agree with what you already knew and what we've been looking at today? How many would agree that the Spanish deliberately introduced diseases into the Incan world before they even got there? Let me know. And by the way, anyone that has just joined us, please subscribe to my channel. This support is very well needed, and like these videos. And also next week, for those that are interested, we'll be doing the collapse of the Byzantine Empire, the Empire of Constantine. So carrying on, I'd like to look at a few more images. We've been left with this image for a while. Do we go to Machu Picchu yet? Yes, we do. Now, how many of you have been to Machu Picchu? The question. You haven't answered my last question. I'm doing all the work here, folks. Answer my last question. How many of you agree with me that, thank you very much. 2 of you agree. That's good. That's good. You don't have to agree. And if you don't agree, why not? So how many of you have actually been to Machu Picchu? This is where we are now. Now, I had an opportunity to go to Machu Picchu, and I will always go on about, I always regret this, that I never ever went. Now, what I'd like to look at now is this wonderful Machu Picchu. Now, I don't know if anyone's going to write whether they've been to Machu Picchu or not, but before we do that, there's an interesting question. I wonder if the Spanish thought that they could exploit South America whilst Europe was having the plague. Yes and no. Plague was endemic. It was always with the man. But in a way, finding the new world was meant to be a fresh start. For the local people, this was hell. This was Dante's Inferno. And I've got no sympathy for the Spaniards or the Portuguese or anyone else coming from Europe who went to these lands and abused it, raped it, destroyed it. But also the Spanish and the Portuguese suffered in their tens of thousands as well. They ended up with tropical diseases. But I've got no sympathy for them. Machu Picchu. When I did Machu Picchu in the week, I think I taught this subject to about 35 people in the week, I think somewhere like that, 40, 35. And when we looked at Machu Picchu, a few people said, I wish I'd have known some of the things that you've told us today when we went to Machu Picchu. And that's an interesting point. And why were they saying that? Probably because lots of what people say about Machu Picchu is through the eyes of a Western archaeologist, Hiram Bingham. It's never good to have a Westerner tell you your history. Bit of a shame, really. It's a bit like somebody from over the border telling me my history in Cymru. It's not the done thing. But lots of people who are of native blood still believe the word of Hiram Bingham. What Hiram Bingham would tell us is that the Incan world was destroyed in a bloodbath. People slaughtered by the conquistadors. The leaders fled to Machu Picchu. And this was their last holdout. And they were never ever found by the Spanish. But slowly but surely, what was left of the Incan world declined. I know you've been there, Pat. You're one of the people who said that they would have wanted to have known more when they went there. But Hiram Bingham is right and wrong with lots of what he's told us. This was not the last city or town of the Inca to be occupied by the Inca. This was not the last vestige of the Incan world. The Incan world, some say, went on till about the 1620s, never ever conquered by the Spanish. But at which point the Incan world, there's nothing much left of it because of internal warfare, Spaniards, disease, lack of food, climatic changes, all these things. But still, at least by 1570, the Incan world, the Incan Empire, sort of still existed. And it's likely as well that Machu Picchu was one of a number of cities, towns, that were still reigned over by this this empire, this very little empire. Probably a little empire that it had been when it was successful, which is the irony, really. If you went back to as you had been 100 years earlier, maybe you could revive the greatness of the Incan world. But it was at that point it was too late because of the diseases. It was far too late. Again, this wonderful Machu Picchu. And again, we got, my clock tells me we've got about 15 minutes to go. So if anyone would like to make a point, then they're very welcome. And I'd like some questions. This is what this session's for. John, I'm sure you've got some questions. And Alice, if you've got anything to say, Anne and April and someone random. And can I just send a text to somebody a minute to say, well, where are you? I'm going to just say, have you joined us? So have you joined us? Joined us online. That's me. There you go. Hopefully we'll get somebody else up here as well. I love this reconstruction. Look at it. Examine it. I've always liked reconstructions. And I'm thinking about this reconstruction. I'm thinking, well, this is Machu Picchu. Why have they got thatched roofs? Why have they got thatched roofs when they were used to technology that gave them the buildings that we see behind me on my own screen? I can't really answer that question. It's one of many questions that I was trying to think about. But it looks quite civilized. Yeah, it does. Civilization does civilization. That's what it's called, the Incan civilization. But there are different forms of civilization. So Machu Picchu was self-sufficient. It grew crops and food on its terraces. This is the wonderful Machu Picchu again. Dioramic plan of the landscape. And this doesn't look like a great city that the emperors would be at. This is why people started to think, well, actually, Bingham must be wrong. This doesn't look like a place that the emperors would have gone to. In fact, when he had found Machu Picchu, it wasn't long after that he found Vilcabamba. And at Vilcabamba, it's believed was the last, one of the last holdouts, along with Machu Picchu, of the Incan Empire. Now, we don't see lots of stonework like this at Machu Picchu. In fact, Machu Picchu, it looks like, was rebuilt. Okay, the stages with Machu Picchu are as follows. Probably first occupied quite some generations in the past. By around roughly about 1450, this is when this gateway is built. And the reconstruction of the buildings that you've already seen are about the time that after the 1500s when they're rebuilding some of their old sites, but they're not building it in an old megalithic way with the very large stones. They're not building it with the great stonemasons that I had before. So even though very likely, and when you look at this illustration, when you look at that doorway, I think they got the reconstruction wrong, because I don't think you're going to get the emperor through there. It's a bit smaller than the reconstruction. But the one point is that the whole Incan world has these terraces, flights of steps, and those flights of steps lead to these wonderful sites. And there are, as I've already said, there were 2,000. The empire itself, from north to south, was 2,000 miles in length, but there were tens of thousands of roadways. And these roadways were not just narrow trackways. These were very narrow steps as well, leading to the trackways. Now, this is an interesting point. Somebody is actually disagreeing with me. And what I'm going to do a minute, I'm just going to send another text to somebody to find out where they are. So if you can bear with me, folks, I'm trying to get somebody else on who should actually be with us. So I'm going to, it's a shame I haven't got somebody else with me to send text for me and so on. So if you can bear with me a minute, sorry for this interruption. I'm going to say, here we go, online now. And by the way, anyone who hasn't already, subscribe to me and like, please. I'd like to get up to 10 likes and a few more subscribers today to keep things going. This is why people do YouTube, because they like to connect, and it's a great way of connecting. Pat says, I thought it was a retreat or summer home for the elite. No. There you go. Well, this is what Hiram Bingham said, that this was a retreat and summer home for the elite. But we started discussing the fact that maybe this was just an everyday town for the Inca with a temple. This is nothing like Coricancha. This is nothing like any of the any of the other sites, like Kayamaka, with great sort of temples and stuff. This is the middle of the way Incan town. But because right, okay, let's really answer that question without sort of faffing. Let's get straight to it. Hiram Bingham was looking for the city of gold, El Dorado. He thought he had found it. It turned out this wasn't El Dorado, one point. But because when he found it, he thought that this was, because of where it was, this must have been a retreat. As in your own words, Pat, a retreat or summer home for the elite, right? But there's several other theories. The retreat, or the last retreat of the Incan leaders, it's believed was Vilcabamba. This is at the end of a sort of long valley type network. So it's some believe that this was a pilgrimage site, but there's not many temples here either to be a pilgrimage site. Others believed it was a bog standard town, as we've already said, of the Inca. It may have been visited by the emperors once every now and then, but lots of archaeologists are now thinking that this was, even though it's an important site, even though it laid hidden from the Western world and the Spanish, most importantly, there's no evidence of the Spaniards ever being here. So the Spanish never ever found this, and this is what led Hiram Bingham to believe this was the retreat of the last emperors. But lots of people argue that there are a number of different other reasons what this site meant and how it felt and sat within the Incan world. So a few other points. I can't really blame the Spanish because the conquerors were thinking globally. They knew the extent of the world. They had knowledge, but they should have compensated the Inca, not destroyed them. Pat, Anne, right, moving on the image. I think to be honest with you, in a way, can't stand what the Spanish did to the Incan civilization, but they conquered the land that was bereft of the Incan civilization. The Incan civilization was collapsing. They were just taking over towns and cities that were deserted, right? So it's not really a conquest, is it? So they were reoccupying towns and cities that the Inca had already abandoned due to the civil war, disease, and all these other things. So did they need to compensate the Inca? We don't know. Maybe they did. Well, they didn't, but you know. And there is, it could be said that, you know, they entered a vacuum. The Huns, for example, were blamed for destroying the Roman Empire. I've already said it wasn't the Huns' fault. You know, all the Huns were doing coming over the Rhine, they were just occupying empty cities. The Anglo-Saxons were the same when they were coming over to Britain, the small numbers of Anglo-Saxons. They were seeing the empty cities left by the Romans. They were just leaving them to collapse, but they were occupying the old villas and stuff that the Romans once used. They weren't brutalizing and conquering the landscape. Now, just smoking the green stuff a minute. If you look at this image, you can see something rather interesting. And what is rather interesting is the roofs of these houses. They look gold, don't they? City of gold. But by the time Hiram Bingham got there, you know, the buildings would have collapsed. The city of gold roofs, that thatch, but this would have glistened from a distance as well. Sort of, I thought I'd chuck that little bit of a point in there. No gold, not no gold. Very little gold was found at this site. So if it had been, that's the point, Pat, right? If this had been the retreat of the Incan leaders, why was very little gold found there? If gold was important in regards to the sun god, not important as a golden commodity. That's sort of one point. And when Hiram Bingham got there, there were 4 small families living here. Those small families were turfed off the land by Hiram Bingham to sort of make out that he was the first person to ever go there. Like to mention again that we've only got 7 minutes left. So, you know, what I'm going to do is go through the remaining images. And what I'd like anybody to do is, if you've got questions, anything you want to say, write them in now. Don't leave them to the last minute like last week. So I've got time in the last few minutes to actually digest them. Look at this. Maybe I should have put this in the beginning. But when you compare this with Machu Picchu, these were the great massive walls that the Incan civilization was building before the 1400s. With population growing, and somebody's asked, how long does YouTube give us? We've got to end at 1:15. We've got to end, not 1:15. I've got an hour and 15 minutes. So we've got basically 7-8 minutes. So, but this is being recorded so you can watch it tomorrow. Anyway, lots of the stuff coming in there. So I'll look at the images and we'll come back to the discussion if I may, people. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. It's really, really appreciated. And 8 of you following me for the whole thing. And we've had a few others joining as well. When you think about it, these great walls from before the 1400s, because the population's expanding to 12 million by probably about 1500, you know, they probably didn't have the workforce to build buildings like this. They had to downside into the buildings that we see at Coricancha. But then the work at Coricancha is quite wonderful anyway. It's cut a basaltic rock it's made out of, you know, and all the rest of it, and some softer stones. But as civilization collapses, you're unable to build like this. And you want an example of a civilization that goes this way? The Roman world. Big drum roll, the Roman world. And what we do see in Roman Britain by about 320, 350 is that the great basilica buildings in London, for example, are being pulled down and are in ruin because they're not needed. They're not maintained. Roman civilization has got over 100 years to go in Britain before it's collapsed. Well over 100 years. But some of the buildings are decaying and falling apart. We've got buildings such as the Roman baths in Bath in a state of decline and collapse in the 400s, but they're still being used for about another 100 years. So what we're seeing towards the end of civilizations, before the end, and a mark of their collapse is the mark of decline of technology. So I'm using the Roman metaphor and placing it into the Inca metaphor. And then you start to see the decline in technology, indicating that you're getting to the end anyway. So don't blame the conquistadors. It's not just the Spanish who were to blame for the collapse of the Inca. So here we go. Somebody said last week you said an hour, and it is over an hour. Usually I don't like history lessons, but I like your lessons. Oh, thank you very much. So, oh my God, I've done something for history, and somebody's just joined us. So we've got 5 minutes to go. Somebody who's just joined us. Make sure you subscribe and like. So next week, again, reminder that we're going to do the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. We've already done the Western. There you go. So I want to, as we go onto the slides now, as we sort of go towards the end of these very narrow trackways. It's been over an hour since we mentioned the long roadways and the fact that if you're going to have armies, it's going to be difficult to transport them and so on and so on. But it can be said, back to disease, these roadways would be very, very useful in moving diseases and terrible things around the land. You could probably move something like influenza from the north to the south of the country in 70 days, leading to the deaths of millions of people. Can I give you the death rate and how I know? The Incan world itself, in about 1500, had a population of 12 million. By 1572, we guesstimate it being 2 million or less. 90% of all Incan towns and villages have been abandoned by 1572. So that means 90% of the population as well. So quickly on this, you can see the big stones at the bottom coming to the end, smaller stones on the top. This is the building stage from about the year 1480. The stonework above is after the 1500s, indicating decline in technology, decline in population, decline in quarrying as well. And the question is, someone random, who is it? This is the stonework from much early Incan civilization. You can see what I'm getting at. If you've got small empires, they're able to do great things. And they've got loads of gold to eat. And they've got everything. But when you expand too quickly, you lose the sense of your association. And we've been joined by somebody new at the end. We've got 10 concurrent viewers. Remember, like and subscribe very much. That would be very appreciated. So what we have is we have another one of the buildings at Machu Picchu. And if we are able, if the time does allow us to go over, we can see Vilcabamba. So I'm just going to type something myself. Here we go. And also I'm going to write as well, press the bell, because if you press the bell, you'll be reminded of next week's lesson. It'll go directly to your phone. So this is a site known as Ollantaytambo, and if we lose connection, thank you very much for joining us. But if we don't lose connection, then we'll go on for a little longer. This is Oyatambo. It's allowed me to go over, so that's great. What I'd like to do as an end to go to Vilcabamba, the very end of Incan civilization. So whatever things you're typing up there is getting very bizarre. Now, this is Vilcabamba, and there is Hiram Bingham at Vilcabamba in 1911. And Vilcabamba, if Hiram Bingham had realized, was being occupied at the same time as Machu Picchu. Vilcabamba isn't too far away from Machu Picchu. And there it is on the map. Machu Picchu isn't too far away. There's Lake Titicaca down in the south, and there's the wonderful Andean range. And I am going to go over, folks, for those that are interested. Now, oh, Anne's got to go. So thank you for joining us, Anne. You've been a babe. So as we come to the end, Vilcabamba, what you can see at Vilcabamba is an interesting question and an answer. The archaeological evidence at Vilcabamba tell us not so much at Machu Picchu, because of Machu Picchu being extensively excavated, we don't have the very high evidence that we see from radiocarbon data. We've got some radiocarbon data stuff anyway from Machu Picchu from more recent excavations, which ties it in with Vilcabamba. We look at Vilcabamba probably being abandoned around 1270, 1272. And thank you for saying it's been a very interesting session. We're coming to the end, Alice, so anyone's got anything else to say it now. But Vilcabamba being abandoned around that date, the last water flowed from those three spouts, 1, 2, and 3, about 1572, and suddenly Vilcabamba was abandoned. Just like that, it was abandoned. And that's rather interesting. Why was it abandoned? Where did the Incan civilization disappear to? And by the way, I got excellent connection now. Shame I didn't have it through the whole thing. Why did the Incans suddenly abandon this site? Where did they go? What happened to them? They would have had to have gone somewhere. There's no trace of them going anywhere. There's no trace of these people going anywhere. Just like the Nazca disappeared. 1272. And I believe it was likely that they were hit by some calamity, like typhus, influenza, or the plague, wiping out the population, or numbers of the population getting so low that the traces in the archaeology are very low. So we're unable to trace them. At this point, the Incan civilization disappears in 1272, not at the hands of the Spanish, because it was still there in 1270, but it disappeared. Why can't I blame the Spanish? There's no evidence of the Spanish going there. There would be lead ball shot somewhere. There would be damage in bones showing iron knife marks. There would be fire evidence. There's no evidence to say that this site was lost in any conflict. The people simply disappeared. I'm going to say disease. I'm going to say those diseases that were introduced, not surreptitiously, but deliberately at the hands of the Spanish before they got to the Incan civilization in 1232. That's my conclusion. The Spanish introducing diseases to the Incan civilization before 1232, eventually leading to the death of the last emperors and the people of Vilcabamba and Machu Picchu and other sites that we haven't found. And 1272 is a death nail. But some say that there's evidence beyond the Andes at the likes of El Dorado, Patiti, which has now been found. We need radiocarbon dates. Maybe up to about 1620, people still call themselves the Inca, and they were never conquered by anyone. So what I'd like to say is thank you, Anne, for joining us, and Alice. And what we're going to do before we go, I've got one question. And I love the name of the game of people who they think someone random is. Don't make me laugh. And I'm so pleased that you've joined us this week. I really hope that you can join us next week. Sorry for the ropey start. Rewatch this video. We also have other recordings of the weekly recordings. And can you actually, what's the question, Pat, before we finish today? Please ask me that question, Pat. What's your question? And what I'm also going to do, whilst I wait for Pat, and just before we end, I'm going to grab a link. And this link will actually be the link for one of the classes that I've taught this week. There's a nice bit of information in it. So I'm going to get the link over. If you can all bear with me, 2 minutes and we will be finished. Those that know me will know that 2 minutes is usually longer than 2 minutes. So what I'd like to do is, Pat, ask your question. Pat, why are you asking me to show us the map? And the link there is the link to one of the classes that I've taught this week about the Inca. I'm sure that the 10 of you who are with us will be really wanting to watch that if you haven't already done so. Last note, subscribe link, press the bell for next week's recording. And also anybody, the title of next week's lecture will be coming up, the collapse or fall of the Byzantine Empire. What I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to thank you for all joining us today. I really appreciate your support. This is the first time I've done Zoom and YouTube together. Last week was a first when I just did YouTube live. I've been doing YouTube since 2007, but doing something live like this is really difficult. I've been doing Zoom since March. It's very difficult technology, so I'm so pleased I've done this. Really appreciate your support. If nobody's got anything else to say, big thumbs up. Thank you very much. And from the bottom of my heart, you know, I really thank you for this. I'm going to end this stream now. And thank you. I'll just give you all seconds to write something up if you want to. So what we're going to do, we're going to do a countdown. Oh, here we go. We got that question. We can't do the countdown first. Where was that last city you talked about? So what we're going to do, we're going to go a little bit down here as well. If you're looking towards Cusco, oh, we've lost the map. But basically, towards Cusco and Machu Picchu, we've got Vilcabamba, and also south of hang on, if I can get the other map so we can just end this. Hang on, other map. Let's go through it. We're just hello, Evan. So basically, all the sites I've been talking about, we're talking about Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo. We're talking about Vilcabamba. You know, they're all in this area. It's quite strange that the Spanish occupying Cusco had no idea about Machu Picchu, no idea about Vilcabamba. Basically, Vilcabamba is just over the road from Machu Picchu, is very nearby. In terms of the map anyway, it's a bit of a trek. So anyway, so if I've answered your question, Pat, many thanks for your support, subscriptions and likes today. This is Karl-James Langford, and anyone who wants to visit the channel, I'm going to put that on there as well. It's Karl and it's J Langford. So anyone else got anything to say? You've got a countdown of 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, and you can catch these notes afterwards. 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, goodbye, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from him. Thank you very much.